So we're here this evening to chat with the elders of Redeemer Church, and thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. And we're really excited to hear about the story of the building project. And it's such an amazing story, a testimony, and a real key time in the life of Redeemer Church about how God is driving things forward and moving and doing new incredible things in the life of the church.
So we've heard about the building project for some time now. I think it's a bit over a year ago when we first started discussing about the developments on the current church premises and the developments happening around. And we know that over a year ago there were also talks about doing some renovation work, so we didn't know the exact details, but some works to be done to the current church building. There was a decision that was made as regards those details more recently. So maybe Phil, you can explain what happened over that time and why the decision had to be made more recently, and then we'll chat about how you guys made that decision.
Great. Thanks for chatting, Sarah, and it's great to be chatting together. So I think we always knew that with the development of the commercial property on the land, that there would come a time where we would need to transition our facilities somewhere out of the way because they wanted to expand the parking and to make use of kind of the facilities that we currently use. And so we had planned to do some transition work to enable that development to continue. And as the commercial project came towards an end and we began to make actual progress with that, we moved the jungle gym, we started to talk about exactly what that transition would mean in terms of moving containers, and seeing kind of the construction work coming towards an end, we began to ask the question, well, like, is that the right thing to do? Should we do a transition, leaving our building project to the future? Is there an opportunity maybe to do something more substantial and to finish the whole job now? And that's kind of led to a whole series of conversations, some evaluation of where we're at, prayer, thoughtfulness, and just asking God which direction we should take. But I guess there are some practical kind of aspects to it. There's the opportunity because the construction crew are moving off the commercial development, they became available to work on our project because of the kind of development and the, them beginning to use that building. It would be a bit awkward if in a year's time we started to dig up the land, pour concrete. It would be a little bit awkward for the rest of the site. And so, considering those practical elements drove us to a point of asking God some questions and evaluating things as an eldership team. And I would say that's what kind of brought us to that point.
Thanks very much, Phil. Do you think, this is open to anyone, there was like a key moment where you were like, now's the time, like maybe somebody got a word or something in your heart that moved you to be like, guys, we have to do something and this is God talking?
Yes, what happened was Phil contacted Sid and I and asked if we could get together just for an initial discussion. And the things were going a bit quicker than expected. So we met and Phil asked that we should pray about this. Now, as a custodian also of the funds of the church, I tend to be very conservative in my approach. And my first default thought was, but we don't have money for this. I mean, how can we do this? Then did take time to pray to God, ask for His guidance, and the next morning during my quiet time with God, I usually would first do my Bible study and then pray. And that morning I decided to turn it around and pray first. Then the verse that came up in my daily reading came from Matthew 19:26, and it says, Jesus looked at them and said, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. And then following that, I read another piece, and this exact same verse came up again. And I felt God was speaking to me directly, to say, but you might think this is impossible, we don't have the money, but to me things are possible. And then when we met the next day in our elders meeting, I immediately shared with Phil and said this verse that came to me, and I felt that God is speaking to us to say, but to Him nothing is impossible. We need to just trust Him. He will bring the funds. This will become a miracle that will testify to His glory. So yes, that's how it impacted me.
Thanks very much, Carla. And perhaps Ed or Phil, just picturing that meeting when Carla comes with such a strong word that where God is going to provide for, how much it's going to cost to progress that with that project. How did that resonate with you, or what was going through your mind when Carla just came with that word?
Yeah, so we were spending time in prayer, and I must say, like Carlo mentioned, he's more conservative, I'm more outgoing, and I've been ready to go for a while. But it is, you sit in prayer and you ask God, and obviously for me on my side, that scripture in Isaiah 52 kept coming back, enlarging the tent, but you're sitting in that space. But one thing that Carlo mentioned, it felt like everything was going fast. And I remember just spending time in prayer, but it felt like you were praying and like God was speaking as like we were praying, things were unfolding. And I do remember a sense of peace, and like it felt like a puzzle fell in place when Carlo came and sat at the table and mentioned that it felt like something just plugged in, and it was time. And so it was like really exciting, obviously, because we have been talking for a while. And yeah, so I think on my side that's what happened.
Okay, thank you. I think also thinking back to when you first told the story, Phil, I think Moya, you had like a certain scripture or a word, if I'm remembering this right, that came up just before that meeting that kind of confirmed like what was happening. Did I get that right?
Yes, I think when we first started talking about the expansion of the church building, I was reminded about God telling Abraham that he will father a nation when he had no son and when Sarah was past childbearing age. And I think looking from their human perspective, it was impossible. And Sarah's belief about God was limited by her human reason, and she actually laughed at the impossibility of having a child. And that incident was followed by a rebuke from God asking, is anything too hard for the Lord? And I think from my human perspective, when I looked at that stage, when we started talking about the building and I looked at it, I realized that from my human perspective, it also looked like this is beyond anybody's abilities. But I felt like God challenged me personally with those exact same words, is anything too hard for Him? And I realized that as we took a step of faith and obedience, that God will actually demonstrate that He is our provider and that we will glorify Him through that.
Was that shared at a meeting, I understand, when the elders met?
Yeah, I can't remember that I shared it at that exact same meeting because it was only the 3 men, but we had a meeting after that, a day where we actually fasted and prayed, and we met that evening. And I think as Phil was asking each of us where we are at and what we felt God said, I shared that verse that evening, yes.
I think what's really interesting here and it's quite powerful is that God is speaking to different people on the team, and we hear kind of corroboration of what God is saying to elders as a team, as the leadership team of the church. From what I understand, there were other people who had a word as well and who shared in that meeting.
So for me, I was just reminded in Exodus of the reference, God is the God of more than enough. And this specific incident was when the Israelites were gathering offerings to build the tabernacle, and they came forward with many offerings, and eventually the workers had to go to Moses and say, stop, we've got more than enough. And I just felt like God is the God of more than enough, and even in this building project, He will be the one that provides, and it will be more than enough. And also just reminded too of that scripture in Genesis 26. We're doing a study on Genesis, and Isaac had planted in the land, but during that time there was a famine. But he was faithful and planted in the land, and it said that he reaped in that same year 100-fold what he had sown. So I just reminded as well that he was sowing into his future. As for us as church, during this time, it's a pandemic. It's not a time that you would normally maybe build a church, but just feel like God will bring fruit from that, add many lives saved, and that we would be just a lampstand that shines brightly. With the extension, more people will come, it will have an impact on the community. And even that phrase, more than enough, I was just reminded too that we often go for a walk with our dogs, and a few times just after this happened, there was this abundance of butterflies and the colours. There's a yellow and the blue and the purple, but then the brown, but on the brown there's this intricate pattern. And I just thought how creative God is, and God is the God of so much. It's not just one tree or 2 trees or even 50 trees. There's thousands of trees and animals and fish and humans, and I think even our thumbprints, each one is unique and different, and just that God can do more than we can ask or imagine.
Paul actually asked each one of us if what we think about the project and whether this is the timing and we should go ahead, and if it's a yes or no. And I'm not a very good decision maker generally, and I always have the buts to say, and I think about the negative side of something first. But immediately when you asked the question, I felt a sort of sense of excitement and just a strong sense of a yes inside of me. And I think, and the story of Noah came to me, and just that time that we are living in right now, and the context of the story of Noah as well, because with COVID and everything that's happening, and without being able to gather in large numbers, you would think, why would anyone want to consider expanding the church at this stage? And is it a wise decision? And when you look at the story of Noah, and that big assignment that God had at that time, and him building a boat with not a single drop of rain around, I think it was really just God's test of sort of faithfulness at that time, saying that I'm going to provide, but all you have to do is come with your faithfulness. And I just felt that that's the same for the building project at this stage. God sort of gave us a promise of the resources that he's going to provide, and all we have to do is come with a sense of that faithfulness, and a faithfulness that's not passive, but actually even in the book of James it talks about how we have to have faith in action. And so part of that action was taking the decisions and saying, yes, are we going to pursue this project, and is this the right time? And then afterwards, we also took a day off and fasted and prayed about certain details that needed to fall into place in respect of contracts and all that. And so I think we had to just trust God that he's in the details, and that this was his assignment, and that we are just part of his plan, his works. And actually it's not about us, but it's about him, and he doesn't need us to make this happen, but we just need to exercise our faith.
No, that's really great. It's a really sort of bold next step, and very exciting for the life of Redeemer. Maybe Phil and Lee, just to ask you both in terms of next steps, so where things are at and how you see the timeline of the project, and also maybe what as a congregation, as a family, we can do to help and support this project.
Sure. So the construction is going full steam ahead. They've poured concrete for the foundations, they're building walls to get us up to slab level, and so we're hoping in the next week or so we should have a slab that represents the full size of the new building, which will be really great. And so that's progressing well. I think kind of big items to come in the project are the roof is a big issue. It's got to be lifted and extended, and that's probably the most complicated part of the project. And so, if you're looking for specific things to pray for, that's a good one. There's some specific items that are key, to the success of the project. From a financial perspective, we've started to receive wonderful, generous gifts, and I think we on around about 800,000 rupees received towards the 4 million. So really doing well. The cash flow is sufficient to do the work as it comes, and so really excited about that. So I think that, I mean, the big things are prayer, to cover the project, for the resources to do the work, for the timing. I guess they've told us around 3 months. So I guess we're looking at anywhere from 3 months, maybe a little bit longer, to finish the project. And we wouldn't like to go too long without access to the building, but obviously want to be able to finish it well. So just to be able to get that done in good time, safety of workers and people on the site, just ease in our relationship with our landlord. We've agreed good terms, and just to have ease in that relationship and success with that. And just really would appreciate people's support. Thanks to the people that have come to serve on Sundays when we've had work parties, and just broken out a serious sweat moving things around. I'm sure wondering why we were moving things into the hall and then back out of the hall, but all to kind of facilitate the steps that were needed. And just the sense of positive support and community in the project is really just so helpful, and thankful for that.
I guess there's a little follow-up question. If somebody really wants to contribute financially for the building project specifically, how would they do that?
Great. So we have our Redeemer bank details in a few places, but I would suggest the website is the best place to go. There's a page there with the bank details on, and you can make a direct transfer, internet transfer into our bank accounts. Please, if you can label it for the building fund, so that we know, to allocate it to the right place. But it's a simple internet transaction away, and the details are there on the website.
Great.
Thanks very much, guys, for sharing that backstory. I think I've felt really encouraged just hearing that story of how God is moving in the church, speaking through different people, but also just makes us feel like we're part of something quite big, something big that God is doing, and we know that God has a big vision for the church community. Thanks very much for sharing that and for encouraging us with those stories.